Well, I have to. I'm going to pitch the first question to Matt. So if folks don't know, Matt Sharp is he is essentially, I don't know how he does all the work that he does, but he is has for many years been a lead point of contact, liaison, legal guidance, legislative guidance for our Family Policy Council movement. He's been a tremendous blessing to the Family Foundation and helping legislators here in Kentucky work on pro-family policy. Matt does incredible work, but we were originally supposed to have another guest that we were really excited about on this panel, Dr. Josephson, and I just wanted to let Matt share a little bit of update why he's not with us and why I am excited that Blaine's with us.
Good to be with you all this morning, and it really is a privilege. I've known David and the Family Foundation for years, such a great organization, and just you're going to see today the incredible work and difference they're making, not just in Kentucky, but across the country, that things that are happening here are impacting things literally at the Supreme Court, other places, and just really appreciate you guys. So Dr. Josephson, so those of you that may not have heard his story, let me give a quick background. Dr. Josephson was brilliant head of the child psychiatry department at University of Louisville. In fact, when he joined in about 2002, 2003, the program was struggling, and he helped build it into one of the national leading organizations in the nation working on child and adolescent psychiatry. And he was invited in about 2017 to Heritage Foundation to speak an event talking about kids and gender ideology and gender dysphoria. He's had years of working with kids, and he was seeing that the idea of putting these kids that are dealing with this confusion and distress about their biological sex, putting them on puberty blockers and hormones, it was doing a lot of damage to kids. It wasn't helping them, and it was hurting them. So he was, as an expert, leading expert in his field, was asked to weigh in on this. And as a result of his speaking at that Heritage event, he comes back to University of Louisville. His faculty colleagues and others start complaining, oh, we don't like him out there speaking. Next thing you know, he's demoted from his position as head of the department to junior faculty, and then his contract is refused to be renewed, effectively denying him. So we filed a lawsuit challenging that in 2019, his demotion and effective firing, that went all the way through the court system. And as David said, he wanted to be here. I was hoping he would get to share a story with you, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. But he unfortunately had to have a medical procedure about a month ago that he's doing great, recovering from, just to deal with a couple of little situations, but sends his greetings and wishes he could be here to share more about his story.
Yeah. Well, let's certainly be praying for Dr. Josephson and his full recovery. But Matt, what were some of the main takeaways from Dr. Josephson's case? Because obviously it's incredibly timely to some of the policy battles that have been going on the last several years. And are there other cases like it that you're seeing across the country right now?
Dr. Josephson's case ultimately boiled down to discriminating against people of faith in the workplace. This was a medical professional, an expert in his field, who just simply expressed his views and opinions as an expert on the harms of gender ideology to kids. Imagine if Louisville, University of Louisville, can do that to him. What can your organization do to you? What can your profession do to you? This is ultimately about the freedom of doctors, nurses, medical students to be able to speak out on these issues, whether it's gender ideology, whether it's abortion, whether it's IVF, whether it's all of these other sort of radical new medical procedures that we're seeing, for them to weigh in and let their voice be heard. But then ultimately for them to practice medicine consistent with their faith, to make sure that no doctor, that no nurse, no one is ever forced to participate in something that deep down they know is wrong. You know, we would never tell a pastor that, you know, they have to preach something that they believe is false. We would never tell an attorney that you have to take a case that you think is wrong. And yet we're telling doctors and nurses across the country, you have to give cross-sex hormones to a kid. Or even in states like Kentucky, where thankfully with the Family Foundation, you guys prohibited that and banned that. What happens when that young girl turns 18? She can still go get those. And what if a doctor or nurse says, I still think that's wrong? We've got to protect those conscience rights. And we're seeing far too many instances where doctors, nurses, and others are having those rights violated, and even in other professions as well. And so that's why Dr. Josephson's case is important. It's setting that precedent that no one should be forced to violate their conscience as a condition of going into the workplace.
Yep. Well, Blaine, I just want to thank you again for being here on short notice. We're incredibly thankful. But
You got, instead of a doctor, a T-shirt maker. A pretty big difference.
Yeah. Well, I was looking back and reminding myself of your story, and it's hard to believe. I think it's almost been 13 years or around 13 years since your business here in Lexington came under attack by LGBTQ activists, ultimately the Fayette County government, for politely declining to print Pride shirts at the Lexington Pride Festival. Could you just, for those that may not remember or may not have heard the story, can you share your story for those that might not be familiar?
Sure thing. Well, we got a call again. It's been 12, 13 years ago. And they had asked for me specifically. And we have sales reps, so that was kind of an odd thing because I'm the owner of the company and kind of run the place. And they said they were with the GLSO, and I didn't even know really what that meant. But they said that they wanted shirts for the local Pride Festival. So I asked, what exactly do you want printed on the shirt? And once they told me, I knew it was something that my conscience wouldn't allow me to print. So I, politely declined. And occasionally with our business, we get messages like that where we have to decline the message, the message. And so we have another printer here in town that we've already worked out with beforehand that, hey, when we decline a message, will you all take it? And they're like, sure, we don't care what we print. So I told them, I said, hey, there's another company, they'll honor our price, and I'll transfer this over for you, but we can't do it. Well, that didn't go over real well. The phone call ended, and a couple of days passed, and I got another phone call, and I didn't even ask who it was. They just asked for me. I picked up the phone, and they said, before we do this, I just want to hear it from you that you will not print these shirts because of your faith. And I said, I'm sorry, I just can't do it. And they hung up the phone. Well, a few days passed, and I was going in every morning. I go to McDonald's to get a drink about 5 a.m., and I'm going in, and you pass this blue hair leader box, and as I was grabbing the door, I looked down, and there was our name on the front page of the paper. And suddenly it hit me. Oh, man, this is it. And so got back to the office, and the employees were really concerned because it was a concerted effort. Basically, it had gone to the mayor, had gone to some of our customers without us even knowing it. Basically came out in a hit piece before we even had a chance to give our side of the story. So we had customers like the University of Kentucky, the Blood Center, and others who pulled their business from us. And the mayor came out. And so that night, actually, I come home, and my wife, she had been on social media, which of course isn't a good idea, and she's read all these things about me, and we just go down in the bedroom, and we're just reaching out to the Lord, just, Father, how can we walk this out and honor you? We're just praying about it, and I get a phone call from one of my business partners who also owns Wildcat Warehouse, who at that time had 15 stores, 120 employees. He said, Blaine, we just got a call from UK Athletics, and they're going to pull our license. And that means 120 people are going to lose their job. And he said, are you sure this is worth it? And I just remember I just hung the phone up and fell on the floor and just wept and just said, Lord, I'll stand and do whatever you ask me to do, but please don't let these people lose their jobs. I just was like, they don't understand what I'm doing for your name's sake. And there's a whole story behind that, but not to go too far into it. Basically, that started the case, and it went 7 years, and ultimately we won, and so that's where we are today. So,
I was familiar with the story, but I don't know that I remembered some of the details with how much of an impact it was in terms of different businesses and even the university and the threats that came. Mm-hmm. You now have some perspective on that.
Yeah, sure.
As we said, it's been a number of years. As you look back now, what did the Lord teach you through this battle? Ultimately, a battle for free speech and for religious freedom.
Well, I mean, honestly, for me, it was just to remain faithful and stand. Yeah. That was kind of the big thing out of it. I know that, we'll, and probably a lot of us here, you'll read the stories of, let's say, Jacob, and you know that God has said, hey, I'm going to be with you. And you're like, Jacob, why are you fearful? Just stand. That's all he wants you to do. And Abraham, why are you giving your wife to Pharaoh? My word, he said he would protect you. Why are you doing this? So just looking over it over these many years, I see that, God just requires us to be faithful. He requires us to stand, and he'll take care of the rest, because so many things over these years where people have come up to me, people I didn't know, who just said, hey, thank you for standing. This was going on in my life, and I saw that. It encouraged me. And even down to people in our company, and that touched them, and their faith grew. And heck, the big thing for me personally would be my children. They were late elementary, early teens. And so the education of that whole process, for them to see that there's a cost for following Christ, that it's not just youth group and good games and all this kind of stuff, but there's a real cost. So I've seen them grow in their faith through that whole thing, and I could have never trained that, but the Lord worked that out. So he was gracious to us in that way.
Man, well, praise the Lord for that. Matt, kind of picking up on that, and man, I'm incredibly thankful that we're both here and with Coach Kennedy later. We have some incredible victories on the religious liberty front, on the legal front. But even despite victories that Blaine ultimately had, U.S. Supreme Court victory for Jack Phillips, Lori Smith's case in 303 Creative, just incredible, important cases. We're continuing to see Christians come under threat in a variety of formats. We talked about it with Dr. Josephson, for simply wanting to live a life of faithfulness to the Lord in their business, their school, in the public square. I'm reminded right here in Kentucky, about this time last year, our governor, Andy Beshear, tried to silence Christian counselors with his so-called conversion therapy executive order ban, simply wanting to prevent Christian counselors who might want to counsel children who are struggling with gender identity or sexuality issues. Ultimately, we're thankful that the General Assembly overwhelmingly overrode that executive order. Earlier this year, and we're thankful for that. But Matt, what are some of the other big battles that you're seeing across the country, and what are some of the other even legal cases that I know are coming up even at the Supreme Court?
Yeah, well, let me start with that exact issue of these bans on counselors being able to help kids that are dealing with issues of sexuality, of distress over their biological sex. These are conversations. These are families coming into a counselor saying, this is what we're going through. Can you help us? And the counselor sitting down with these adolescents saying, let's walk through this. Because we know with so many of these kids that are dealing with this confusion and distress, the gender confusion is a symptom of a deeper root. It can be abuse, it can be anxiety issues, it can be things that are happening at school. And so rather than pushing them to drugs and surgeries, how about we sit down and talk and get to the root of the problem? Because the science shows when you do that, 80, 90, 95% of kids overcome that distress and find comfort with their biological sex. That's what the governor was trying to stop here. And that's what's happening in other states. So one of the blockbuster cases at the Supreme Court, actually going to be argued in 2 weeks, is a case out of Colorado. Colorado has a state law banning the exact type of counseling that we're talking about. So they have made it illegal for any counselor in the state of Colorado to help kids dealing with these issues. They're one of 24 states in total that have passed laws like this that censor counselors' ability to have honest and open conversations with kids dealing with these struggles. So we're challenging that as a violation of free speech. Alliance Defending Freedom, we're representing Kaylee Childs, challenging that. We're hopeful that a victory, and we do think we're going to get a victory in this case, is not just going to protect counseling freedom. It's not just going to make sure that nothing like that ever happens again in Kentucky or any other state, but it's going to move the ball forward of all professions, whether it's counselors, whether it's T-shirt designers, cake artists, whoever it may be, that the government cannot censor and silence your right to free speech. Second big case we've got going on, and just a few weeks, or I think in early December, it's on behalf of First Choice Pregnancy Center. Many of you probably support your local pregnancy centers. I think we've got some of them represented here today that do life-saving work, giving women true options and alternatives to abortion, letting them know about adoption, letting them have resources to help them as they welcome a new child in the world. Well, the state of New Jersey hates pregnancy centers and decided to go after First Choices and some others in the state because of their life-saving work. Specifically, not only did they accuse them of sort of lying and deceiving, they told them, we want all of your donor information. Imagine that. The state of New Jersey wanting every single person that's ever contributed to this pregnancy center. What do you think the purpose behind that was? we know they're going to dox them, they're going to go after, because if you can cut off their funding, you can shut down the organization. So we're challenging that New Jersey action. And that's not just a New Jersey issue. There are states that have done similar efforts to silence and censor and harass the life-saving work of pregnancy centers. And it happens at the local level. So even though we know Kentucky is a strong pro-life state, we have to be wary that one of these local municipalities doesn't try and do the same thing. So this big case for pregnancy centers can help ensure that across the country, their work can go forward and they're not silenced and harassed. And the final one that we're looking forward to in January is a Save Women's Sports law. In fact, it's Idaho and West Virginia are two of 27 states, including Kentucky, that has passed laws saying boys don't belong in girls' sports, period. Common sense. But the ACLU has challenged those laws, and that case is now going up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it ultimately boils down to, can states pass common sense laws? Can schools ensure that fairness in girls' sports continues now and for generations to come? So keep those cases in your prayer, but 3 big cases, all of which have ties here to Kentucky, whether it's the counseling protections, whether it's ensuring that pregnancy centers can continue their work, or ensuring that Kentucky's Save Women's Sports law is upheld and no girl in Kentucky ever has to lose her spot on a team to a guy.
And Matt, remind the oral arguments on the Colorado case is just in 2 weeks, you said, right?
2 weeks,
So
October 6th.
please be in prayer. This is, to jump back to that issue for just a second, I think it's fair to say that these counseling bans that we've seen are pretty close to the direct government intrusion in the gospel, because ultimately what they're trying to do with these bans is say it's illegal to try to counsel someone to say that change is possible, and they're incredibly one-sided. I remember even the executive order that our governor signed here. It would have allowed to counsel a child towards a gender transition that the General Assembly had already said was illegal for a child to participate in. But it would be wrong for a counselor to counsel a child to simply identify with who God created them to be. So incredibly important cases ahead. Thanks for that update. Thanks for stealing a little of my thunder for my update that I was going to share at lunch. But no, I knew you were going to do that. Save Women's Sports case as well, obviously incredibly important. Blaine, I want to come back to you as we think about that you've in the years since continued to be a courageous advocate for religious liberty and free speech in the workplace, working to encourage others to stand by their convictions in spite of any pressure that might come. What's a message that you would have for Christians here today about the importance, particularly in the moment that we live in right now, to live out our convictions in the public square, to be witnesses for Christ, wherever God's placed us, whether that's in our business, in our school, in our families?
I would say be an example. That's probably the biggest thing, is that it's kind of like why we go to the Word. We love to read the stories. They were all given to us to encourage us today, right, to stand. But we're kind of the, continuation of Acts, so to speak, is that other people need to see us stand, because there's kind of this idea that, and I get it, when something like this comes, and I don't care if you're a pastor, business owner, or just you're at school, is that you just kind of want to back away into the shadows and see if it'll just pass you in hopes that it goes by. I get that feeling. But the thing is, people watch us as believers. And so what happens if we kick the can down the road, they cower and do the same thing. And at some point, somebody's going to stand, but instead of a can that they're kicking, it's a tsunami that they can't stand up against. And so to me, even though I would never compare ourselves to the heroes of the faith, but there's little things in the public arena where we can stand up, and it encourages other people, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah. No, I don't think that we can ever underestimate the opportunity that God has provided for us to stand for Him and be a witness for Him. And, I think, again, and as we're going to hear even Coach Kennedy's story later today, it's amazing to see when God has called you to take a stand where He has placed you, the ramifications that can have. that can have. Incredibly important. Matt, as we've talked some about the upcoming Supreme Court victories, going to be sharing some during the lunch as well, but we've had some incredible Supreme Court victories in the term that ended earlier this year in June with the Scrimity decision upholding the rights of states to simply protect kids from these radical gender transitions, the Paxton decision upholding the rights of states to protect kids from online pornography, the Mahmoud decision protecting parental rights, and many others. You know, many of these important decisions that we have seen that you've already kind of alluded to, even some of the strong actions that we've seen the Trump administration take through some incredible executive orders that we're incredibly thankful for. Isn't it refreshing to have an administration in Washington, D.C. that's working to promote truth in some of these policy arenas? Incredibly thankful for that. But as a family policy organization that's primarily focused at the state level, I like to remind folks and encourage folks that so many of good Supreme Court decisions, even some of the actions that the Trump administration has taken, were made possible because of the momentum that we've seen in states advocating for years to save women's sports, to protect kids, to stand up and protect parental rights. Do you agree with that? And I assume you do, but what are some other important areas, and why is it so important that we lead at the state level on some of these pro-family policies?
Yeah. I could not agree more, David. You know, one of the reasons why ADF has for so long partnered and supported great work like David and the Family Foundation and their other FPC partners across the country are doing is because the change starts here. You mentioned the Scrimity case. That case, how that bubbled up to the Supreme Court was the Kentucky and Tennessee laws being challenged and getting a victory at the Sixth Circuit that set that up. You guys made that change possible. Your state made it possible for us to uphold the law of 27 states now that are protecting kids. So what happens here matters here. Same thing on so many of these other cases that you're talking about. It was state policies that started it. So I agree with you. I celebrate the stuff that the Trump administration is doing. It is so refreshing. On day one, it's executive orders on women's sports, executive orders on what it means to be male and female. There's so many other things in the pipeline of stopping the flow of money to abortion clinics, stopping the flow of money to gender clinics across the country. But that is a whole lot easier lift when you've got 20 states that have already prohibited boys and girls sports, when you've got 27 states that have banned gender transition of kids, when you've got 20 plus states, including Kentucky, that have protected the fundamental right of parents to raise and care for their children. When even you're looking at the Supreme Court, imagine your justice is weighing a case, and let's take the women's sports law. Is it easier to uphold that law if it's only 1 or 2 states that have done it? Or is it a lot easier when over half the country recognizes that men don't belong in women's sports? So what happens in the states is critical, because it not only is we talk about states being the laboratory of democracy, we work out the language here, we work out those principles. And what you probably see, if you ever look at some of the stuff that the Trump administration is issuing, the executive orders, and you look at Kentucky law that you guys passed over the past few years, that language is being reflected in what's coming out of the White House and what's coming out of the administration. So the state action helps sort of flesh out the language, build the principles that then the federal level can do and sweep across the country. And it ultimately creates an environment and a culture that makes it a whole lot more possible for us to move on this. Again, I go back to 2020 when Idaho and a few other states were kind of working on this women's sports issue or the gender transition bans. The winds were against us. We knew it was the right thing, but nobody wanted to talk about it. But because of courageous legislators, like many of you in this room, standing up for this, because of organizations like Family Foundation saying this is right and we're going to stand for truth no matter which way the winds are blowing, and ultimately because of each of you speaking out, we were able to shape and change the cultural wind so that now 70-80% of Americans agree biological truth matters. So that's why what's happening here matters. And I can't emphasize enough, invest in what's happening here. I know it's so easy to say, oh, everything that happens in D.C. matters, and yes, it does, but ultimately, the seeds of that start here. So invest, double down of what's happening here, and that's why we are so honored to, again, partner with you guys in the great work you're doing here, David.
Well, Thank you for that, Matt. And we couldn't do the work that we do without partnerships with ADF and many other of our allies. But let's look forward. We've got some good things done, but the 2026 session will be here before we know it. And there's some important policies that I think Kentucky needs to lead on. Some legislative issues that we actually made some strong momentum on this session earlier this year, but didn't quite get across the finish line. What do you see from ADF's vantage point of some areas, some gaps where Kentucky needs to step up?
Yeah, I think 3 big ones I'd like to touch on. Number 1 is that issue of medical rights of conscience, of protecting doctors, nurses, medical students from ever being forced to violate their conscience or being prohibited from speaking out. Now, you may be saying, well, Dr. Josephson won his case. Yeah, we had a great victory earlier this year. University of Louisville ended up having to pay over $1 million in damages and attorney's fees for violating his rights. Yeah, huge victory. But his case started in 2017. It took 8 years to get that victory. I'm sitting next to Blaine. Blaine's case was many, many years to get those victories. When we can pass a state law to simply say, no doctor, nurse, medical student, counselor, no one will be forced to violate their conscience to participate in an objectionable procedure or be punished for speaking out on issues of public importance, we can stop those lawsuits from ever being necessary. We can stop anyone from ever being silenced or censored or losing their job because of their deep conviction. So I would love to get that passed. I know we got really, really close this past session. Want to see it get across the finish line.
Very close.
Very close, yeah.
Passed in the Senate for the first time and made it all the way to the final reading in the House. Yeah. So got to keep pushing on that one. Yeah. Sorry, I just had to interject.
No,
that.
Absolutely. Number 2 is protecting and expanding your Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Kentucky is one of, I think, about 29 states, maybe 30 states now, that have these very strong, robust Religious Freedom Restoration Acts that generally prohibit the government from interfering with your ability to exercise your faith. Many of these laws were passed in the mid-90s, great laws, but we've had a lot of developments since then, and we think there's some great ways to actually expand and build upon that. So I think there was another bill this year that was working its way through that would have expanded and clarified and strengthened those religious liberty protections. Those are the broad things that help people like Blaine to make sure that these protections are not only if the government's coming against you, but even if you're like being sued by a private party for your religious freedom, that you have the right to exercise that. So that's number 2. We want to strengthen religious liberty protections. And number 3, there's a Women Bill of Rights that has been working its way through that does a few things. Number 1, and it shouldn't be necessary, but this is the world we live in, it provides clear definitions of sex, male and female. So no one can say that because I identify as a woman, I am now a woman. No, you are a male or woman based on your biology, not on your internal perception or anything else. So putting those clear definitions in state code. But what else it does, you guys have already made some great strides on women's sports and even protecting women's privacy, but I want to make sure that a girl is protected no matter where she goes, whether it's at school, whether it's in her college dorm room, if she has to go to a women's shelter, if she maybe has to, unfortunately, she's incarcerated, she shouldn't be forced to share a jail cell with a male. If she goes to a public school library or a public park or to the state capitol, we want to make sure that those women's privacy protections to secure locker rooms, restrooms, changing rooms, sleeping quarters, that across the board, no young woman is ever forced into a situation where she's forced to share one of these intimate spaces with a man. That is wrong, it is immoral, it is unethical, and we have a duty to protect our girls' privacy and safety.
Thank you, Matt. And I know that's going to be an incredibly important issue. All 3 of those, but I know State Senator Lindsay Tishner is, I see her in the back of the room. She's filed legislation to that effect the last couple of sessions that we're working on with others. Is State Representative Bill Wesley? There's Brother Wesley. So I just want to make a point, and folks may have seen this, but literally it was one of the last 2 days, I forget now, the veto override period of the General Assembly. We saw a clear example of why we need to put common sense privacy protections across the state. If folks remember this story, when there were some LGBT advocates that were advocating against the General Assembly overriding the governor's veto on some of the important bills that we were talking about, stopping our tax dollars for paying for gender transitions. There was a situation where one of the keynote speakers at the LGBTQ rally was a man dressed as a woman inappropriately. He was probably about my size, and was going into the women's facility with young children in there. State Representative Bill Wesley confronted this gentleman and said, "You're not going to go into the women's restroom anymore." And we're incredibly thankful for what he did. But that gentleman on the mic said, "I am going to continue to go into the women's restrooms whenever I want to." Essentially a direct threat. It shouldn't take a state representative to have to confront someone at the Kentucky Capitol to keep a 6'5" man in a sheer white dress from going into the women's restroom at the Capitol and frightening young little girls. And I just share that story as a reminder of why that issue in particular is something that we're going to continue to work on in the upcoming session. Well, Blaine and Matt, as this panel draws to a close, Blaine, as you look back at your stand, your legal battle, once again, just any reflections you have on God's faithfulness to you, to your family, even to your business, and how you would encourage Christians with that.
Well, kind of what I was saying before, just be faithful and remain faithful. I do want to throw something out there, though. We have had some good victories here over the past, let's say, 5 to 7 years. And instead of feeling like the wind is against us, it's kind of at our back a little bit right now. But we all know, just something I was thinking about over the last couple of days is that pendulum shifts, right? It's kind of come into our favor during this season. And so we're thankful for that. But we all know that pendulum comes crashing back at some point unless God just brings a massive revival. Let's pray that happens, right? But we know that happens. So as this pendulum goes this way, and it's a time of almost rest, don't let it be a time of rest. This is the time to prepare and train and disciple and prepare for that season that probably will come. I would say that. And number two, just something before I leave, because I think this is incredibly important if you get anything out of what I say, is to prepare, know where you stand before it happens. Yes. And I want you to really think about what I'm saying here, is that when I don't care what field you're in, I don't care if you're a pastor and you can imagine, potentially someone standing up in the middle of your sermon and they start calling you anti-this and all these phobes and whatnot. How are you going to handle that? Think about how that would happen. If you're a young guy and you're on a sports team and suddenly you've got to participate by putting a logo on your shirt, how are you going to respond to that? Because if it just happens and you haven't thought about it, one of two things will happen. You'll either cower and you'll do it and you'll regret it the rest of your life, right? You'll just cower. Or number two, you'll respond in a way that doesn't honor God. You'll respond out of emotion and maybe represent him poorly. And so really think about what field you're in, what you could potentially, deal with. And I'll be quiet, but with this I'll say a couple years before all that came, we had a meeting and we sat down and we said, okay, how are we going to handle if anything came into our company that we felt like was objectionable? So we had a whole meeting about it. So when that call came in, guess what it was? It was a reflex. There wasn't any need for conversation. I knew exactly, I didn't have time to think in my head, oh man, financially this is going to hurt me, socially this is going to hurt me. No, reflex, boom, we already talked about this and this is what we do. So that's what I would share with you guys, is take time, think through those things that you could potentially face. Okay.
Thank you, that's good. Matt, similar question. Final word from your time advocating on behalf of clients like Blaine and so many others. Final encouragements about how Christians are called to stand strong on truth and conviction.
Look, if nothing else, you've seen a living example of how when you courageously stand, God stands with you and brings about victory. Blaine is one of many, many cases across the country where we're seeing God move in judges' hearts and legislators' hearts and lawmakers' hearts when one person like Blaine, like Alan Josephson, like the young girls, Riley Gaines and others standing for women's sports, when they stand, God intervenes. And so like Blaine said, I encourage you, when that moment stands, it may be a conversation with a neighbor, it may be a situation at work where, like Blaine said, you're asked to do something, say something, affirm something that you know is wrong, or someone, a colleague that's facing it in their workplace. Stand with them. Number two, exactly like he said, now is not the time to coast with the wind at our backs. Now is the time to put our pedal to the gas and give it all we got. And I'm telling you, there is no better organization, in my view, doing that than Family Foundation. We've partnered with them for years. They're an organization that has constantly said, we're going to fight hard battles, we're going to stand for truth, and we are not going to back down. And so many of the great things that are happening in Kentucky is because of this organization and their consistent stand for truth without wavering, without blinking. So as you're putting foot to the gas, stand with them as they're doing it.
All right. Would y'all join me in thanking Blaine and Matt for sharing with us today? Thank you, guys.